If we don't have an audience to practice on, there are two things that we need to become better at public speaking when we are alone. And that is our body and our comfort with ourselves. What do I mean by that? Let's get into it. The very first thing we'll notice if we are nervous speakers is that when we go on stage, our bodies tend to tighten up. And people can see that. It's one of the most obvious body language signs of nervousness. When we see somebody who's closed off, we can tell that they're trying to hide something, as opposed to somebody who's more open and loose with their body language. Now, how do we actually get to that place? It's by moving our bodies in ways it's not currently comfortable doing. And by that, I don't mean stretching or doing anything absurd. What I simply mean is that in most cases, if we have nervous personalities, or if we tend to get nervous when we're put on the spot, especially in front of 100 people, we may find our bodies being tight even in gentle situations. For instance, if we pay attention, we may find that we cross our arms way too often, or we find it comfortable to put our hands in our pockets. Even when we sit, we might have somewhat of a closed posture. Now, this does not apply to situations where we're extremely comfortable with our friends and our families. But from all the people we've coached and trained, this trait has come out more than ever. And to get rid of it, we need to first get conscious about us being very tight with our bodies and start being more open. So for instance, if we find ourselves crossing our arms, we need to let go of that. If we feel a little stressed out or anxious, not just for public speaking, but in other normal situations as well, we can start observing our shoulders and our face a little more. Are my shoulders very tight? Is my face very crunched up right now? And when we start noticing these things, we can start to loosen them up. Even when we're having a general conversation with someone, if we can be more conscious about using our hands and our bodies more to convey certain messages, it can be a great way to practice public speaking without having an audience. So for instance, if we need to point at something, instead of doing this, we can start doing this. Or instead of saying, I saw this huge bear, we can say, I saw this huge bear. It makes a world of a difference. And I know these things might seem a little silly, or they might seem a little too small to solve a problem like public speaking. And you're right, it's not going to solve the problem of us being nervous on stage or of us becoming better public speakers, but it does help us move our bodies in ways it's not used to. And the more comfortable we get by loosening the system up, the more comfortable we'll be on stage. The same thing can be applied to our face. When we go on stage to speak, one of the main areas that hold us back is our facial expressions. Because we've not had a chance to practice in front of an actual audience, we might get very nervous, and that shows on our face. We might not be able to smile much, or we might smile too much, and we might not be able to show certain expressions to complement our message. So we need to start loosening this up even before we go on stage. And we can use something known as the emoji exercise to do that. This simply means going in front of a mirror, opening up those emojis that we have on our phones, and start replicating them to ourselves. When I started off my public speaking journey, I used this method to loosen my facial muscles up before I went on stage for a speech. So by making weird faces like it again helped me move my face in ways it's not comfortable with. So when I did go on stage, I was a lot looser, and I did not need an entire audience to practice this. Now moving on to the second part, which is being more comfortable with ourselves. Most of the people that we've coached, and I've faced this as well, that when we make them practice a speech and make them re-hear that same speech, they tend to cringe, because a lot of us don't like the sound of our own voice, or don't like watching ourselves on a video. And that's because we're not very comfortable with ourselves. And if we're not comfortable with ourselves, how can we expect to be comfortable on stage in front of so many other people? And if we practice public speaking, it's one of the main things that help us become better speakers, by being more comfortable with ourselves. But if we don't have an audience, there's an exercise that we can use to do just that. There are two ways you can do this. You can either write down your own speech, or as I did, you can go on the internet, pick up a monologue of sorts, and just transcribe it down on a piece of paper. I personally chose this one video from this channel called Shots of Awe. I used to take one of this narrator's videos and just transcribe them because I love the way he spoke. So after you have a speech draft, whether it's your own or whether it's transcribed from somewhere else, we got to take out our video cameras on our phones and practice giving that speech. Then we simply need to rewatch our speech and self-evaluate. Now there's a good chance you'll feel cringy watching yourselves, especially if you're not used to public speaking. But I'm putting a link in the description of an article that we wrote on how to self-evaluate your speeches, which will help you through this entire process process as well. And if you do this for 30 days, in general conversations, being more loose with our body, stretching our arms a lot more to communicate certain messages and observing when our bodies get tight, as well as recording a 2 to 3 minute speech, watching it and self-evaluating it for 30 days in a row, you will see results in becoming a better public speaker, even if we don't have an audience to practice with. Now, if you're willing to follow this process but want to know some simple hacks that you can use to look a little less nervous when you do go on stage, there's an entire video we've made which we've tried to keep very, very practical, and you can check that out right here.